The bow hold is one of the most important factors in being able to get a good sound out of the violin, and it can be tricky to get the hang of. So today I'm going to talk about how to find a good bow hold, the purpose of a good bow hold and how to think about it, and some common problems that I often see come up and how to deal with them. I'm Judith, I teach and play violin and viola. Let's talk about the bow hold. There are different schools of thought on bow holds. You might have heard of the Franco-Belgian and the Russian bow holds. A lot of the principles are the same, but there are slight differences. So if you have a good teacher that you're taking lessons with, do listen to what they say. All right, let's find your bow hold. The first thing I often tell students to do is just to find a loose, relaxed, natural hand. As one of my teachers used to say, a civilian hand. And you'll notice in your regular hand that everything is nice and curved, nice and relaxed, nothing is hyperextended, nothing's feeling like a claw, everything has just kind of a gentle curve to it, and there's a hollow inside the hand. This is something that we want to tap into in our bow hold, so keep that kind of natural feeling of ease and looseness and relaxation in mind. From there, I like to start with the thumb. I like to take the corner of the tip of my thumb, so not the very tip and not the pad, we're going to use that corner there, and that's going to go on the stick between the frog and the leather. It's not going to go underneath or in between, it's going to go right on the side there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take the end knuckle of our middle finger, and that's going to end up across from the thumb. So if we do that aside from the bow, that looks like that. You see how we get a circle there with that thumb against the knuckle. We put that on the bow, so we find where we had our thumb. We put that middle finger across from it. While you're doing this, make sure you're keeping the bow well supported with the other hand. We're not holding the bow up yet with our bow hand at all. We're just finding the placement of the fingers. So again, we put that middle finger across from there. The ring finger is going to go right beside it. From there, I find that the hand just kind of leans over so that the index finger ends up resting there. You'll notice that the middle and ring fingers kind of make contact with the bow at the top knuckle or the third knuckle, whereas the index finger is going to make contact at that second knuckle over there. And you'll see that once we found this shape, again with our thumb staying over there, the pinky can actually sit right on top of the bow, and that's where we want it. The exact placement of the pinky can be a bit different for everyone, but in general you'll want to find where that naturally sits fairly easily. So you'll notice it's probably not right next to the ring finger, and it's also not extended over to the screw like that. It's probably just got a little bit of space, and then it sits right there. One of the things I often like to do with the bow to check that everything is where it wants to be is I tap all the fingers individually. So I'll tap the pinky, I'll tap the middle two fingers as a group, and I'll tap the index finger. This helps to make sure that all of those fingers aren't using extra tension and that they're finding a place that feels good for the fingers. Another way that we can find the bow hand is literally just to find that relaxed hand like that, drape all the fingers across, and then just tilt the hand so that the pinky sits on top of the bow. And you'll find that those fingers end up in more or less the same position. And then you just simply stick that thumb across from the middle finger against the stick, keep a gentle curve in it. One of the things that I'm going to point out is that we want to make sure that we keep that thumb curved and we keep the pinky curved. Now by curved, I don't mean that we want to create a rigid claw like that. We want to keep that natural curve. If anything, we want to maybe exaggerate that a little in the thumb, but we don't want it tight. We don't want tension in the hand. We want to keep that curve so that we create a sort of circle in the hand. Let's talk about the function of the bow hold. I'm going to go over both the function of what each finger individually does, and then we're also going to zoom out and try to get kind of a mental idea of the function of the bow hold in general. If you find a bow hold where all the fingers are kind of putting in the least amount of work, you'll find that it's the thumb and the pinky that are doing most of the heavy lifting here. I can even lift the other fingers off, and the pinky and the thumb are doing most of that work there. The thumb more or less acts as a fulcrum that's going to support the stick from the bottom, and the other fingers in various ways adjust the bow from there, with the pinky serving as kind of the counterbalance to keep the weight from pulling the stick down. This is why we want to keep the pinky nice and curved. The arch is one of the strongest shapes, and keeping that curve there will let your pinky tap into both strength and flexibility as we're using the bow. You might notice that it can take some time to build up that strength and balance in the pinky. So when you're practicing, you take frequent breaks and shake out your hand and, maybe hit that like button and then go find that bow hold again and check in with all the fingers. I think of the other three fingers as a sort of cradle that holds and guides the bow. It keeps it supported, keeps it in the right place, and can add a little bit of weight to it as well when we need it. If you find your bow hold and then turn the bow over like that, you'll notice that the index finger is now doing most of the holding of the bow. The stick is also kind of resting against these two fingers here. That feeling of where it is resting against the fingers, where it's being supported, we want to kind of keep that and be able to tap into that when we're playing like this as well. But then of course the hand is sitting into the bow rather than the bow sitting into the hand. You'll notice more specifically that the middle finger across from the thumb helps to kind of keep that balance against the thumb. The ring finger is going to help stabilize the middle finger, and it's also going to steer the direction of the bow quite a bit, along with the pinky. The index finger, like we talked about before, has kind of that deeper hold, so it uses that knuckle there to hold the bow. This is because it doesn't only help the middle two fingers steer the bow, it's also going to play a major role in kind of adding weight to the bow when we need to add more bow weight. It does this through something called pronation, which is the gesture when we use basically the wrist or the forearm to turn the hand like that. And if we did that with the bow, you know, we'd be pushing it down like that. Normally, of course, we're pushing against the violin like that. You'll notice that the hair is going down. And you'll notice that when we do that, it's the index finger that ends up taking on most of that weight or that pressure against the bow. Of course, we want to be careful that we don't press too much because then we get a very constricted sound, but that's a whole other video, so we'll get into that some other day. All right, now one important thing is that when I think about the bow hand more generally, I prefer not to think of the hand as gripping or rigidly controlling the bow. I like to think of the hand as guiding the bow. Another way to put that is I think about the motion that the bow would have to make, where it would have to be, how fast it would have to go to get the sound that I want out of the violin. And then I see what my hand and what my fingers have to do in order to let the bow find that gesture, go in that direction and make that sound. This is probably related to why some teachers really don't like the term bow grip. Because the bow hand really is supposed to be quite loose. When I'm holding the bow and when you're holding the bow, you want to be holding it so loosely that I could, for instance, easily take the bow out of your hand. You're really not holding it tightly so that it's got like a death grip. Some people say that if it feels like it's going to fall, you're doing it right. This is why it's probably a good idea, at least at first, to see if you can practice your bow hand over top of something soft like your bed or your couch or a nice thick carpet. The violist William Primrose also had a really interesting comment about how to think about your bow hand, in that the bow really becomes an extension of the arm. So the bow wrist hand connection there becomes almost a second elbow. A healthy elbow, of course, is firmly attached, but it's very mobile. It's flexible, it can move back and forth, it can make like a range of different motions, and it's a joint, not a muscle or a bone. So it doesn't tense up, it just facilitates motion. Sometimes I tell my students to imagine that there's a giant behind them, you know, pulling the tip of their bow up on the up bow and kind of seeing, okay, well, how would the hand follow? What would be kind of the looseness in the hand? What parts of the hand would move if it was just kind of following along with the bow? Now, just a note, you may have heard about different bow holds, such as the Franco-Belgian bow hold and the Russian bow hold. My bow hand is probably much more along the lines of the Franco-Belgian, but they do use the same principles that all of the fingers need to stay relaxed and flexible. So even with the Russian bow hold, which tends to be just a fair bit higher and have kind of the pinky and the thumb a bit straightened out, they are not locked. So the pinky and the thumb shouldn't be locked. They should still be capable of that flexibility. And I will give a couple of bow exercises later, but one of the things that we should keep in mind when we're doing the bow exercises without the violin as well is that, of course, most of the time the bow is actually going to be resting on the violin. So gravity is going to add a whole different element to our playing. Check this out. If I take the violin and I take the bow and I put the bow on the string at about the D string and the A string, like that, I can actually take my thumb off the bow. Right? And all the fingers are supporting the bow there. Or again, if we have it kind of more at the tip there, I could lift the fingers and the thumb can hold up the bow. So this kind of reinforces an earlier point that the hand is really going to serve as a guide, but also the fingers are going to serve slightly different purposes depending on where we are in the bow and what we're doing with it. For example, you'll notice that when we're playing at the frog, the pinky becomes much more important. The pinky is really keeping the bow from falling that way like mine just wanted to go. The other fingers are helping with that as well, but you'll notice that the pinky is really quite engaged there. When we go further down, so we have a down bow, we go towards the tip. Here, my pinky is actually much less important. I could lift the pinky and nothing's going to happen to the bow. Like I'm really just using the index finger and the thumb a lot more, so that index finger has become more important as we went down the bow. Again, as we go on the up bow, I can feel the pinky starting to engage, so the middle fingers are more important here. And here I can feel that pinky very much holding up a lot of that weight again. As I was doing that, if you were particularly keen, you might have noticed that my fingers straighten out as I went on the down bow too. So if you watch, here all the fingers are quite curved, right, like that. And as I play a down bow, the fingers are going to straighten out. So you'll notice that the pinky here, for example, is much straighter, has less of a curve to it than it did before. Even the thumb is a little bit more straight than it was. If we do the up bow, you'll see that that curve and that roundness comes back into it. And the pinky is where a lot of people tend to struggle here. What I sometimes see is that on the down bow, the pinky will straighten out, which is fine. But then on the up bow, it'll stay straight, it'll stay locked. So what happens is that one of these joints here, that first joint there, tends to lock for some people. And then the up bow, the pinky stays straight like that, and that makes it a lot harder to get a smooth sound at the frog. So see if you can keep the pinky relaxed when it's out there, even if it's straightened out, and make sure that you're focusing on getting that curve back into the pinky on the up bow. That's not the only thing that people tend to struggle with the pinky on the bow hand. I often see pinkies that want to straighten out like that to be able to hold the bow, or drape across, or even hold it over there to stabilize. But we do really want to train it to stay up there. It's going to take a little bit of effort, it's going to take a little bit of time, but it's going to help you out a lot in the long run. One of the things that can help for that is something called a pinky house. There's a good video about it by Elizabeth Fadley, so I'll make sure that I link that in the description. I don't have time to go through it here, but it just uses tape to create a sort of guide for where your pinky's going to go. And if you use that for a while, that'll help your pinky kind of automatically figure out where to go and how to stay curved. I'm also going to give you some exercises to practice that'll help you find your bow hold. Yes, you are going to be, playing on the violin with your bow as well, and that'll help. But it's good to be able to isolate the bow and focus on a lot of these different things that we've talked about through some exercises with just the bow. So let's talk about those. The first one is windshield wipers. So you find your bow hold like that. You make sure all the fingers are right in place. You tap them properly, and then we just go back and forth. Like that. So again, this is a good one to check in with. The pinky is going to be pushing down on the end of the bow. That's going to bring the bow up here. Up here it's fairly neutral, and then you'll notice that that balance goes into the index finger here. You want to make sure that all the fingers stay where they want to go, that nothing straightens out, everything stays nice and curved with that relaxed, smooth bow hold that we want. Another good one, but this one's quite tricky to practice, is called the teeter-totter. This is where we simply give a little push with the pinky, and that's going to send the bow up like that, almost like a teeter-totter. This is going to help to strengthen the pinky. It's going to be tricky at first. I know that the way I'm demonstrating, it might look kind of easy. If this is trickier for you at home, it's very understandable. There's a variation on this that's a sideways teeter-totter, and that's really kind of playing around with seeing how the fingers let the bow move to the side, so move back and forth. Of course, this is something that we're never going to move the bow back and forth this extremely, except if you're using extended techniques with Garth Knox. But in general, we won't want this extreme of emotion, but it's a good one to be able to check in with to see how all of the fingers affect that motion of the bow like that. Another one that I would recommend doing over top of carpet or your bed is bow crawls. So you're going to take your bow hand and you're just going to keep them all relaxed and slowly crawl your hand up the stick like that. And once you've gotten to the tip, of course, I'm not letting go with any of the fingers, they're really mostly just sliding along. Now the trickier part is to go back down with your bow crawls. So again, keep the pinky on top of the stick if you can, keep the thumb curved, and just let all those fingers stay loose and find their way back. Of course, this exercise, you could argue about how realistic it is, since we're never really going to be moving the fingers back and forth like that, but it does help to keep the fingers curved and to be able to get comfortable with finger dexterity. Finding a good bow hold isn't going to solve all of your bow related problems, it's just the start. After that, of course, we have to figure out how to play with a straight bow, how to find a good sound point, how to find the right amount of weight, how to find the right bow speed. If you feel like you might want some help with that, do subscribe to the channel. I'll be making more videos about things like that, as well as I'll put a link in the description to a blog post that I've done troubleshooting a number of those things. For now, remember to just regularly check in with your bow hold before every time you go play. Play lots of open strings. I've got some open string songs that I'll link as well if you want some practice with that. Now go practice and have fun. I'll see you in the next one.